In today's video, we're going to be talking about flying your drone in big cities. Specifically for this video, we're going to talk about New York City. Specifically where in New York City? Manhattan. Specifically where in Manhattan? The World Trade Center. But the reason I'm making this video is because one gentleman named Adam. Guys, this is Adam.
My name's Adam. I'm out here from Dallas, Texas, and I flew my drone into the World Trade Center.
Adam decided to fly his drone to catch an orbital shot of a fountain located near the World Trade Center building. And while he was doing the orbit, obviously the orbital path was too wide for the fountain, and he ended up smashing into the building and he lost his drone. Yes, he made a mistake. This is not about coming down on Adam, but it's more about delivering a video that I think will give you some tips that if you do decide to go and fly in a city like New York City, you know what you're up against. What do I mean by up against? There's a lot of challenges to flying in New York City, and I'm going to list them and help you work through them if this is something that you really want to do. The first thing you want to do is open an app that shows you if it's safe to fly or not. The best app that I recommend is Kitty Hawk. It's also known now as Aloft, A-L-O-F-T. I did a video on that. Check it out over here, how to use it. It's fast, it's simple, it's easy. But more importantly than getting permission, which you can also do in this app as a hobbyist or as a 107 operator, is just checking out your airspace to see what you're dealing with, especially in big cities. So that's the first thing you want to do. Open up the app, go to Maps, and type in the location. For here, we want to go to World Trade Center because that's where Adam was. And then we can zoom in on the picture and we'll see this little black pin that shows World Trade Center. Now, as you can see, the airspace is quite clear around there. It's like super clear. There's no restrictions. There's a little red box there. That means you can't fly over Federal Hall. That's not allowed, right? There's another box over there. That's a hospital. It probably has a helicopter pad on top, so you can't really fly there either. Anywhere that you see in red, basically you don't want to fly, right? You don't want to fly over here either. But let's look at the World Trade Center where Adam was. It's pretty clear around there. So yes, as a hobbyist and a 107 operator, technically he can fly there. If we look off more to the right, as you go further up Manhattan, you can see that's when the limitations start with this little blue area. And then you have the 400-foot limitations around there. And then as you move around and you get closer, you have zero altitude restrictions. That means you can't even take off because zero means 0 feet off the ground. But going back to where Adam is, he is quite clear over there in terms of airspace. So technically he was clear to fly. But this is where things get interesting. Now, if you're from New York City and you know me, you're probably saying, but X, yes, you don't allow people to fly in New York City in your group. It's not that I don't allow people to fly in New York City. I help run one of the largest groups in New York City. It's called NYC 5 Bars Drone Meetups. If you're thinking about coming and visiting New York, come to this Facebook group, join, ask questions. In particular, look for the people who have the badges group expert next to them. They most likely have experience flying in New York City, and they're like this guy here. It says group expert next to his name. He probably has experience flying in New York City. Now, if you join this group, you cannot post New York City photos of you flying in New York City, and I'll explain to you why we came up with this do and don'ts. I'm not saying it's illegal. I'm just saying we don't allow it here, and the reason being is because of the challenges that come with flying in New York City. But you can still come in the group, ask questions if it's something you're going to do anyway. So back to the map. Now that you've scouted your airspace and your airspace is clear, you've got to make sure that you have your location. Now, New York City has this old aviation law that's not really enforced, and as you can see from Adam's video, he's out about free to walk. He just can't get his drone back. He has to buy a new drone because the cost to remove the drone from where it's wedged in the building could run about $100,000. He's better off just buying a new drone instead of asking for his drone back, unless he wants to pay a $100,000 bill. He just has to keep it moving. Now, Adam did say that his drone is roughly $1,200–1,300, so most likely he's probably flying one of these, which is the Air 2 or the Air 2S, or he's probably flying the older Mavic 2 Pro, or he could be even flying an Evo 2 Pro. I don't know what he was flying, but this is my guess. Now, why is that important? I'll come back to that in a second, because choosing the right tool is important. But let's talk about taking off and landing. Back to this old aviation rule. The old aviation rule says you basically cannot take off and land anywhere in New York City except these 5 designated areas that have been outlined or given to us to take off and land in. Outside of those 5 areas, you can check the link below, go to the 5 boroughs group if you plan on flying in New York City, and we will definitely outline those 5 areas for you. And yes, World Trade Center is not one of those areas, but outside of those 5 areas to take off and land, you're technically breaking the old aviation rule in New York City. Now, there are some workarounds, like if you're on private property, maybe you're on the rooftop of your building and you own the building or you have permission to take off, but I don't want to get into all of that. It's a rule that's not really enforced. After airspace and location scouting, which is the number 1 thing you need to do, number 2 is picking the right time. Picking the right time is important, especially around World Trade Center. That's like a tourist spot. And that means that people are going to be there walking around just touring the place. The right time will probably be early in the morning, very early in the morning, like just as the sun is about setting up. And not only picking the right time, but picking the right day. You don't want to go during the week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, people are up early and they're going to work. So you probably want to go like a Saturday morning, because most people in the city are going to be partying. They're going to be drinking Friday night. They're probably going to be getting up late on a Saturday or getting up late on a Sunday morning. So Saturday and Sunday morning is probably one of the best times to fly in the city, and fly early, like before the sun rises, just before the sun rises, like half an hour before, or 30 minutes after the sun rises, or during the sunrise. That's probably the best time, because there's not going to be many people out and about. There's not going to be many tourists out and about. So if you're going to a tourist place like this, you don't want to go middle of the day. You don't want to go middle of the morning. It's going to get crowded, especially on the weekends. So early morning, weekends, when there's nobody working and tourists are not really out and about. Because if you're flying over people, that essentially is illegal. So you could be clear on the airspace, you could be clear to take off and land, but if you're flying over people, you're breaking the rules as well. So choosing the right time and the right time of day is important as well. Number 3, choosing the correct drone or choosing the correct tool, right? Now this is important. If you are going to do a shot like Adam's, right? And it all depends on what shot you're going for is going to determine what tool you need. So let's look at Adam's situation specifically. He was doing an orbit, right? On a $1,200 drone, he's probably not flying this, the Mini 2, because this has no sensors, right? And if he's doing the orbit, he probably was flying something like this, which has no side sensors. And when he was orbiting, he hit the building at the side, like smack, right into the building. This has no side sensors. So doing an orbit with this is not the wisest choice for that type of shot in the city. So more than likely, you might be thinking, oh, go with something like this that has side sensors. This is the Mavic 2 Pro, right? The Mavic 2 Pro has side sensors, but the side sensors may or may not work in orbit mode. This side sensors on this drone only works when you're doing active track, or if you're in tripod mode. That's the only time the side sensors work, which means you're going very slow. So you probably can't use this tool either, right? You need to be familiar with how to use the Orbit app. How close in proximity can you orbit? Most of these drones, when you use the automatic orbit feature, it doesn't allow you to orbit automatically unless you're at least 16 feet away from your center point or whatever you're orbiting. So take that into consideration. 16 feet in the city is not much. You could probably hit another building 16 feet away orbiting, right? This drone might or may not actually be your best option. This drone has sensors everywhere. This is the Evo 2 Pro, right? And it's also the Evo 2 8K, basically the same drone, but it has side sensors. Now, if Adam was flying this, more than likely, this would have picked up the building and it would have stopped and would not have completed the orbit. He would not have gotten his shot, but at least he would not have hit the building. So this, if you're listening, Adam, this is probably the way you want to go. However, sensors are not really there for you to depend on. You need to do your due diligence and set your shots up correctly. So depending on sensors is just not the way to go. The best way to do it is actually, I think, in a situation like that and flying in the city, is flying one of these little bad boys that do not have any sensors, but work on your craft, work on your skill, and learn how to orbit things effectively, manually using your sticks. Don't depend on the app and the algorithm and the technology to do it for you. In most cases, when you're doing tight orbits in tight spaces where there are buildings all around you. So this might actually be the best choice, or might not. This kind of leads into my next point, which makes things even more complicated. Yes, it gets more complicated. And a lot of times we don't even realize what we're getting into. I don't know if you've ever noticed or if you've ever driven your car in Manhattan, but a lot of times you're driving with GPS on, you'll hear GPS signal lost. With your phone, just using it as a GPS, or you're walking around in the city, you will hear GPS lost. These devices will lose GPS because GPS needs, or these GPS chips need access to the sky. It needs clear, open sky in order to give you a clear, accurate GPS reading in order for these chips to function properly. And that's a huge problem in the city because you will constantly be losing GPS if you're flying in the city. GPS is what keeps the drone in position and allows the drone to fly back home to you if it loses signal. It uses the GPS to mark and hold position and to return to where it took off. It marks that point via GPS. So when you're losing GPS, you're losing, number one, the ability to return back home, and number two, the drone does not know exactly where it is. Now that's a big deal, but it's not such a big deal because you can still fly a drone if you lose GPS. You just have to be careful of the wind. The wind will kind of push you around, and that brings me into my next point, which I'll lean into, and I'll come back to the GPS and the compass thing because, yeah, we're not done there yet. But on the wind, you want to check UAV forecast. That's the app I use to check the wind to make sure that it's not too windy. When there are buildings around, the wind barrels through these buildings and creates a lot of turbulence. So you will take off between these buildings in the city and your drone is getting beat. It's getting knocked around. It's getting beat up by the wind because the wind is just tunneling through between those buildings, bouncing off the buildings, and it's creating turbulence that you wouldn't feel if you were flying over the water outside of the city or flying in a big open area without tall buildings to trap the wind and have it bouncing all around. So there's even more challenges with wind. So the wind doesn't have to be that strong to be turbulent. So you want to check the wind. And then you also want to monitor the wind. Why? Because the time that Adam was flying, in particular, right now in New York City, it's a very, very weird time. The sun is coming in and out of the clouds. There are gloomy days one day, it's bright days another. The wind and the weather in general is just very unpredictable here now at the beginning of August. And that means that the wind can go up, the wind can drop down. So you need to ideally have a second person with you who's constantly monitoring the wind every minute or two as you're flying to make sure it's not going up and not, well, going down is not a problem, but it's not going up, which will increase the turbulence while you're flying between these buildings and make things harder for you. Now coming back to the GPS thing, you will constantly lose GPS when you're doing these maneuvers, and when you're using the app to do the orbiting, it's depending on the GPS location as well to keep you in a precise orbit. And when you lose GPS because you're flying between these buildings, it's not like the drone will fly away, but as the GPS signal gets weak, so will the accuracy on your orbit or whatever your waypoints or just your general flying. Everything is going to lose accuracy, and then your orbit might go wider or it might go narrower, and then you might hit something, which could have been one of the reasons, I don't know, I wasn't there, but could have been one of the reasons why Adam hit the building, right? Not necessarily his fault per se, meaning it wasn't really how he set it up. It's just the whole accuracy of not having accurate GPS. I don't know, I wasn't there, but that could have been one possibility. And things can get even worse when flying in the cities, guys. And this is probably the most important point that you need to take into consideration. Your compass. 9 out of 10, when you go to fly in the city, it will ask you to recalibrate your compass. Sometimes 2 times, sometimes 3 times. Sometimes when you calibrate it, it's good. As soon as you put the drone down and it's in the concrete or it's on the ground, the compass goes off again. Why? Because the city is near water. These cities they're built out of, yes, it's concrete. New York City is a concrete structure, but there's a lot of steel in there. There's a lot of metal in that concrete, and it's all around you. And that means that it's going to send your compass haywire. If not at the point when you get off the ground, because of all the metal around you, at the point flying amongst those buildings, your compass will probably get triggered as well. Now the compass, or I should say losing compass, is worse than losing GPS. When you lose GPS, you still have control over your drone. When you lose your compass, I'm not talking about compass abnormality. That's a warning. If you get that, you better book it and come right back. I'm talking about you have completely lost your compass. Sometimes you don't even get a warning, or the warning is just there for a second, your compass is gone, and then guess what happens? Your drone shoots off. I don't care how good of a flyer you are. At that particular point, it's too late. You cannot, I repeat, you cannot control your drone because you do not have control over your drone. And while it's exposed to much more metal in those tall buildings, that's going to send it even more bonkers. Before you know it, there goes your drone smashing into a building. Well, but I have sensors, right? Well, not really. Sometimes when your compass goes haywire, your sensors don't even work. So is this really going to be that helpful with the side sensors if you're going to have compass issues? No. So you're probably saying, okay, can't I get a drone with 2 compasses? Well, currently, none of these drones that I just showed you have 2 compasses. None. They all have 1 compass. This one has 2 IMUs, which is good. The IMU is basically the brain for the whole system, so you've got redundancy there. But this one doesn't. The Air 2 and the Air 2S doesn't have dual IMU. The Mini 2 or the Mini 1 certainly doesn't have it. This one doesn't even show what it has, if it has 1 or 2, but when you hit calibrate, it only tells you to calibrate 1, so I'm assuming this only has 1 compass and 1 IMU. And none of these have 2 compasses. The only drone that has 2 compasses out there that's pretty much affordable is the Phantom. The Phantom has 2 compasses and 2 IMUs. So you stand a better chance with the Phantom if the compass fails. But this is not really a compass failure problem we're talking about. We're talking about a compass malfunction. And if one malfunctions, then most likely both are going to malfunction. So I don't even know if that's going to help you. And then the Phantom is a much more bigger drone. It's a much heavier drone. And I don't even know if you're going to want to take that for city flying. As a matter of fact, there's a drone called the Skydio 2. That drone might even be your best option because it's got all the sensors to prevent you from hitting at the side. And the sensors are not going to malfunction due to a compass error because it doesn't work with the compass. It straight up does not work with the compass. So there's no compass abnormality error that you'll ever experience there, and your sensors will always keep you from hitting anything, and that has the best sensors in the business. Problem with that drone is that it can only be used for close proximity flights like what Adam is doing, simple little orbits and stuff, because that controller is working off of Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi does not give you a lot of range. And that means that if you want to switch to building shots, flying above buildings and cityscapes and stuff like that, you probably will lose signal with that drone. So even though it won't hit anything because it's got the sensors, and it probably will come back to you even and avoid everything, even if it loses signal, it's probably still going to be frustrating because you're constantly going to be using signal and losing signal, and you're not going to get the shot you want. So is that the best drone? Now you might have to walk with 2 drones, one for the citywide scape shots and another one for the close proximity shots. Do you really want to deal with all this? Is the shots really worth it? That's what you've got to ask yourself. So anyway, guys, I'm not mad at Adam. I understand mistakes happen. Right? Everything is a learning lesson. So the purpose of this video is to make sure you don't have to deal with that. Right? Know what you're up against. Know what you're going to be facing. The whole point is I prefer to give you the information so that you can know and make an educated decision as to whether this is something you want to deal with or not to get these shots. Give this video a big thumbs up. Please share it to anyone who you know is thinking about flying, not only in New York City, but any city in general, because this is stuff that we deal with here flying in New York City. We've got tons of experienced flyers who deal with this stuff on a regular basis, who've been flying safely and getting shots in New York City for years upon years upon years. and they just know the ins and outs. They know certain locations and stuff like that. Try to connect with these guys in the group that I shared with you earlier. Try to talk to them. Maybe even try to meet up with them so you have someone with experience by your side and someone who can help spot you and guide you and tell you if you're going right or going wrong, because we all know that one thing can affect the other. And then when things like this happen, it can lead to more rules and regulations, right? So share this video everywhere, guys. Help people to understand what they're up against when they do decide to fly in the city. Make sure you hit subscribe if you have not hit subscribe already. If you find these videos valuable, make sure you hit the bell so you get notified when I release more videos like this. All right, guys, that's about it. With that being said, I will catch you guys whenever I can. Make sure you become a Patreon, guys. Big benefits to Patreon. Get direct access to me. Any questions? I'm right here on Patreon. Support this channel, and there's benefits. Last Mini 2 went all the way to the UK.